one of the things we're going to do in the module is actually step a little bit more into the sky in different ways, and there's so many different ways you can step into the sky. And one of the problems we have with the sky is that as we engage with it in our Western way of life, is we suddenly encounter a heap of numbers and circles and with weird names and measurements and so on. But there are ways of engaging with the sky without necessarily having to feel like you're doing astrophysics, that you could actually just engage with it. Because one of the important things with the sky is that there's a lot of it. Obviously it fills 50% of our view, if not more, sometimes less, etc. We're really without it. If ever we're without it, we're actually very aware that we are without it. In other words, when it's utterly removed from us, we really know it's removed from us. And even if you're just in your basement and it's a room without any windows whatsoever, you're aware it's a room without any windows whatsoever, and actually so you downgrade its use, or that actually imposes quite a lot of restriction on how that room is used. And you know with a basement, even if they can put some form of skylight through a footpath or something, immediately that makes the room far more usable. It's interesting, isn't it? And even we're inside now, and we've even got the blinds closed, but we wouldn't want to be in a room without windows. So humanity, not to mention the rest of life on the planet, unless you don't like oxygen and you live down at the bottom of a volcano, right? So there are those critters, but generally we are deeply connected to the sky, and we're so needing of it, we tend to ignore it. And so one of the things I want to do in this module is to start to slowly bring back to people doing the module an awareness of it, hence the Sky Journal idea. And the thing is, one of the gorgeous, beautiful things about the sky is, as I said, there is a lot of it. But just as there's a lot of it, every single one of you will have a different sky view, depending on your location, of course. And even within a given location, the sky is never repeating. The sky today we see out of these windows, we're never going to see that again. You're never going to see that again. So we have 50% of our world view, which is utterly, constantly changing, just in terms of climate and light, before we even get to those little bits of light that move around. And we tend to just take it for granted or ignore it, and focus on our immediate things. We tend to be myopic. And yet, we can also, you could do a sky journal in architecture. Architects play with it. We enjoy architecture that plays with it. This is a lovely example. And sometimes even if an architect doesn't play with it, we enjoy looking at it through buildings. A lot of us like to look at it through stones. Right? We look at it in relationship to landscape, or we just look at it. So we've got all different ways of handling it. And every single one of us will actually touch the sky or engage with the sky in our own unique way. And I think that's something that the three of us very much have for this module, is wanting to actually, for you to engage with in your unique way without actually stifling that, helping you shape it academically but without stifling it. So, having acknowledged that there's a lot of it, and it's very varied, and it's constantly varying, the other thing just to bring to your awareness is we define our entire world by it. We live in a dome, defined by the sky. Now, we live absolutely, permanently, totally in a dome, which generally is blue, or if you're in England it's grey, and so on. And indeed, within that dome, as I said, even before we actually have all the lights that move in it, we also have all the clouds. There's a whole body of work on cloud divination, as I'm sure you're all aware. Then, of course, we've got how animals move through it, like birds, how birds move through the sky. There's all sorts of pathways and highways and backwaters you can take when you actually think about how do I engage with the sky. Maybe you are a cloud watcher. And I know myself, if I'm thinking about something, I look up and I see an incredible cloud formation. That is meaningful for me. I think, wow, okay, there's a message. that's a heavenly discourse. Just one view of it. So, there's different ways you can engage with it apart from clouds. If you want to actually start looking at the moving bits of light in the sky, to use that sort of framework, then you need to find a way in. For all of its huge size, because it varies so much all the time. Thanks, Darren. Because it varies so much all the time, and only half the time do you see all the moving lights, another half of the time, you've got blue skies and clouds, you've got this constant variation, and when you do get a good night sky view, you can't sort of go out as a kid and think, right, that's where that is. Because the damn thing not only moves on that night, but then another night you go out there and you look at the same time and it's not there again because it's a different time of the year. So you've got this hugely shifting concept, and it's very difficult to find your way in. And so most of us tend to not just sort of think, yes, nice stars. And maybe you might learn one constellation or two, or if that, maybe not at all. And sometimes just watching the moon can be your best way into the sky, because also the moon can help you in terms of, if you know where it is in the sky, you can actually help you use it to find things in the sky. Or the other way you can do it is to watch the zenith, because everybody can lie flat on their back and look straight up. So the zenith is one thing that every single person can find. It's hard to say to someone, look due east or look due west, they might not know where that is, or look north or look south, they might not know where that is. But everybody knows where up is. And that's an interesting thing, to watch the zenith, and it's very easy to download free planetarium software from the web. You don't need anything fancy to actually see what's on the zenith for your night, to learn to see something, to find something in the sky by using the zenith. The other thing you can do is find a constellation that you know and use it as a gatekeeper. Literally, just as within anthropology and doing a research project, you need a gatekeeper into a community. You can think of the sky and its numerous stories as a community, and you can find your way around it by finding a gatekeeper that will let you in, a constellation that will let you in, that you can recognise whatever time of the year it is or whatever time of the night. You can find it generally, you have an awareness of it, you can see it in three dimensions, you start to get a personal relationship with it, it starts to look back at you. To me, the sky is looking down at me as I'm looking up at it. Then by learning that, then you start to think, right, well that's just next to so-and-so, so I can get it to introduce me to so-and-so and help me actually understand that. So by working on just one constellation in the sky, that's a good way to actually just get into the sky if you're wanting to understand the stars. And also, if you're coming from an astrological background, start teaching yourself how to work out where the ecliptic is. Where is it? Because that's a good one. You could go outside and you think, well, the sun is now in... I always have problems with that bit, right? What's the date? Right. Okay, so we're in June. So the sun is in the zodiac sign Gemini. So kick it back onto Leo, is that right? Taurus, one back, yeah. I always go back the wrong way. And then you think, well, if it's midnight, the sun's right below me, Taurus is below me, so therefore above me will be, Scorpio or whatever. So, and that'll give you a rough idea of what should be up in the night time. And that's a really handy and simple thing to do. And if you're in the MA with an astrological background, most astrologers can put a chart in their head, and that can be very useful for actually extending it out to the sky if you want to. So that's another way of doing it. Watching the moon's really fascinating. It does change. And this is just the skyline for about 51 degrees of latitude. And the new moon next month, just in a few weeks' time, in early July, will be there. It's going to be in Capricorn, because the sun will be pushing into Cancer. So it'll be the summer full moon. And that's its altitude. And the very next month, when it reaches a full moon again, the full moon will be in Aquarius. I'm now talking tropical zodiac signs, okay? So I'm not talking constellations. And it will be there, at that elevation, just a little bit higher. A month later, as we start to get into the sun in September, into the new moon in Pisces, it will be much higher than it was in Capricorn, higher in the sky. At the equinox, when the sun moves into Libra, we get the new moon there, and it's going to be about halfway up the sky in elevation of what it's going to get above. So there it is up there, new moon there. And then so on to the dark, dark winter, when the sun is around the winter solstice and a new moon happens. Just when we actually get only a little bit of sunlight, we get this great, big, bright, gorgeous full moon. Just when we need light, we get it. By a sheer lovely coincidence of the mathematics and the tilt of the Earth. So, at the brightest time of the year for the sun, we get the smallest, lowest, most insignificant full moons. We don't need the light. At the darkest time, when there's so little sunlight at this latitude, we get the big, bright full moons that hang in the sky for hours and hours and hours. Now, just watching that can be interesting, just being aware of that. That's not even looking at the phasing, it's just looking at the full moons up and down. And what the moon does, obviously once you get Cancer, when we go to the next sign, go Leo, drops down again. So you've actually got this constant going up and down. And what the moon does is the moon transcribes the same rhythm that the sun does during the course of the year. In terms of, this is also where the sun would culminate when it was in Capricorn, where the sun would culminate, this is looking south, when it was in Aquarius, where it would culminate when in Pisces. So you're getting a mirror image. And this is why they are the two luminaries. So just watching that starts to give you insights in some of the historical literature. I've got a little movie here just to show you quickly. So this is set for Bath, and the green line is the horizon line. Okay, so this is the horizon, and this is the line arching up as the ecliptic. This is as technical as we're going to get. We'll get a little bit more technical, but not very much. So I'm just going to animate this through one day. Every step is 2 minutes of time. Okay, that's what you're looking at. And I'm just going to animate it through one day. And the thing I'd like you to watch is the relationship of the ecliptic to the horizon. This is happening in one day, not over a year, in one 24 hours. And every little step is 2 minutes. And that's south, this is east, that's west over there. It was a bit hard to juggle it. I want you to note how the ecliptic is now dropping down towards the horizon line, getting lower and lower and lower, and the Hydra runs along the horizon. Scorpio doesn't crack the horizon. This is one of the great shocks of my life when I moved here. Capricorn, which we know, that Sagittarius Capricorn, that little triangular thing, is where the sun is at winter time. And if you watch that, you're getting a very low little arc Capricorn plays across the horizon. And then parts of the ecliptic, which are to do with the summer parts, are now getting quite high. So this complicates watching the sky, because in a sense what we see when we watch the sky is simply, even just during 24 hours, the ecliptic is doing this. And the amount of that wobble is dependent upon the latitude, obviously. But it's doing this. Because the joy of it is we don't live in a nice, perfectly Platonistic, spherical, upright position. You know, there are tilts, there are angles, there are wobbles. And this is what gives us this. This movement of the ecliptic up and down means that parts of the ecliptic will rise along the horizon in different places to other parts of the ecliptic. And so that cascades into archaeoastronomy in terms of the sunrises move along the horizon during the course of the year. You know that. The moon rises will shift depending on where the moon is on the ecliptic. The stars will where certain stars rise will always be consistent because the ecliptic is locked in terms of amongst the stars. But you're getting this constant movement up and down, which changes light, which changes the way buildings have to try and capture that light, changes what buildings are doing, how they're orientated to certain times of the year. Suddenly, it just ensouls the earth, in a sense, because everything is flexible, has to take it into account, has to make adjustments for it. So we can come to a building or a megalithic site or any structure at all, and we can look at that structure and we can deconstruct it the other way. If it's a human-made structure, we can ask questions as we do, is why is that stone pointing there, or why is that altar facing in that direction, or whatever the case may be. And the answer to those sorts of why questions, more often than not totally, but there's a good possibility the answers will be based on literally that wobble that you're looking at, and how the planets are tied to that ecliptic, and how therefore that implies the sun and moon will do different things at different times of the year. So there's much in that wobble, right? I think that's the best way to say it. And if this is the first time you've sort of encountered that wobble, it's worth contemplating and playing around with in planetariums, etc. To get it. What I have found in many years I've been teaching this is people in our contemporary culture have a great deal of problems in learning to think in the sphere, because we are taught to think basically more two-dimensional or on this plane, and it's very difficult. I teach students star phasing, and students, they can be very, very intelligent, wonderful people. They cannot comprehend a spherical movement, because it's sort of like that software's not been installed by our culture. So one of the things you might find as you start to engage with the sky and look at things like this is precisely that difficulty in getting the concept. And if you want to get that concept, I suggest that you buy yourself, it can be quite a cheap one, but buy yourself a small celestial sphere. If I didn't have to carry the Regulars Award, I was going to try and carry some spheres along, but just buy yourself one just to actually play with it. Roll it over in your hand, put rubber bands on it for a horizon line, and simply play with it. Okay, and this is just another slide I did of watching the moon. These are the three. It gives you a bit more of the visual. This is the new moon next month over Bath, and here's the one after it, and here's the one after that. And I think if I do that again, I tried to get them lined up, but didn't quite succeed. You can actually see the visual difference. It's quite substantial, and that's just over 3 months. Indeed, the whole lunar calendar is another interesting heavenly discourse. Well, the solar calendar is as well, right? But in a lunar calendar, the full moon will always be on the 14th or so of the month. Always. So let's see, today's date is the 20th of the month. That in a lunar calendar, that would always be a third quarter moon. Always be a third quarter moon. There'd be no confusion about what the lunar phase was. It'll always be a third quarter moon, and depending on what month of the year it was, the third quarter moon would actually culminate as one of these, etc. So you would know, third quarter moon in June, 20th of June, the moon will be third quarter and it'll be low. Not much light. So let's not schedule our drinking night with all our friends for that night, because it's going to be hard to get home, there won't be too much light. And indeed there's a lot of you'll trip over in the literature of certain organisations here in England, meeting, in the 16th century or so, and the meetings would be held on the nights of the full moon, because then people could walk home by the light of the moon. And that starts to impact, just that little piece of sky knowledge starts to impact on possibly how astrologers might view a full moon in terms of its astrological meaning, because it actually starts to get cultural meaning. And that cultural meaning of more activity or socialising, that cultural meaning linked to a full moon because it offers light, has probably been culturally linked to the full moon since human beings started gathering together at night. It's only electricity that removes that from the equation, the street lighting. So I'm just throwing ideas at you, just throwing concepts of what are the sorts of things we want to open up when we actually start looking at the sky and understanding it a little bit more. So looking at the moon is one way. Finding the zenith is another. This is the most technical thing we're going to do. Venus is directly above you. And once you've found up, directly up, it's also just a really useful thing to actually just have a sense of elevation. To have a sense of that. Obviously that's 90 and this is 0. So you can rough it out for yourself to start to be able to judge that. Because planetarium software will tell you the elevation of things. So that moon picture for next month's new full moon has only 18 degrees of elevation. So you could sort of rough that out yourself as to where you would expect the full moon to reach to, because it's only 18 degrees of elevation. You can also use your hand, and we'll do bits of that as well, because your body actually is one of the original measuring devices. But just start to be aware that you could actually divide up that arc. Just so you actually start to understand roughly what 45 degrees would be. Just ballpark sort of stuff. That's really handy, because the North Pole, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, is always going to be located at the elevation of whatever your latitude is. So if you go out tonight and if there's a clear sky, the North Pole will be 51 degrees above the horizon. And will always be there. If it's not there, you've moved. Or the Earth has and we're all in trouble. And that can be such a really important thing to help you get your bearings. You only need one thing to start to get you in the sky. You only need to know one little gatekeeper, one little doorway to hang on to. One way I can engage in that way. And the rest of it will start to open up. I believe the rest of it will open up because I actually believe that human beings have a whole lot of sky software that's now disused. It's like DOS operating system. No, it's the original bootstrap, and it's still there because we don't get rid of anything. We just put it into the dusty bucket and we don't use it anymore. But it's still there. The other thing you can do if you've got a smartphone is there's numerous applications on smartphones for looking at the sky. I mean, I've got about 15 of them on mine. I just bought another one last night. No, I'm addicted to them. All right. They all tell me the same thing, but I just like them. And all iPads, etc., because the smartphones have GPSs in them, so you can actually point them and it will actually tell you what you're looking at in the sky. And that's really good. But recognise, this is now a personal statement, is that use that to help to find your bearings, and then I recommend then you take it away and you see if the sky will look back to you. But that's my own personal preference. And just very, very quickly before I finish, just the other thing is find a constellation that you know. And you're all in the Northern Hemisphere. When you go out, you get this sort of picture. One of the things that's good to do is to give yourself sky views like this and train yourself like drawing the constellation. And that's a really good thing. But that raises another question. It raises a deeper question. Why do we do this? Why do we make patterns out of that? I don't have the answer. But we are obsessed with patterns and story when we are given a collection of varying dots. We use them. Now, once we start to do that, they are extremely useful. They become a safe blackboard for us to put our cultural stories on, which are protected from the vagaries of life. They become a safe place for us to put stories. And we can build an argument that how that perpetuates our sky mythology and our sky images. So you probably all know what you're looking at. I hope you know what you're looking at. Right. But if you're growing up in a non-sky culture, you might have been taught that that's the Big Dipper and Dipper. And because that's our modern imagery put on it, which should be respected, it's just that it's other things as well. Contemporary society is repainting the sky with a Big Dipper, for example. That's just one example. Orion for Australianised as a child as a teapot. So So in a sense we can say, well, that's the wrong name. No, it's not wrong, it's a different name, and then we've got a different culture who's disconnected from the sky, still putting images on the sky. It might be a teapot, but it's still there. But this is one that you can actually teach yourself to watch, and I've probably done this for some of you before. But here's the Dipper, here. But it actually is a great big bear. And it's a great big bear whose story they know was actually a common human story before human beings moved into North America, because the stories the human beings in North America have match the ones in Europe. So the story about this is a bear. And one of the things you could do, because if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, the bear is always going to be visible. And there's all sorts of wonderful versions of the story around it, but even just teaching yourself how to see it. So here's the bear. The tail, here's the Dipper part, which is in its back. You notice it's got a nose. And this, I've set the stars up on this to be roughly what you'd see in a sort of, maybe not downtown London or on Oxford Street, but maybe out, just a little bit out from Bath, so with still a fair bit of light pollution. See, the bear's got feet. And just to, there she is there. So there's the bear, okay? The great bear. Now we'll just ignore the fact he has a tail. So see that bear? I'm just going to turn off the stick figures. Now, can you see the bear? Can you see the bear's nose here? And the feet. See here and here. And you can start to see her eyes, just like around this area. Start to see them. The head is coming like this. I'll switch it on again. See, so the eyes down to there. I'm going to flip this on and off so you can start to see it. No lines with lines. No lines with lines. Focus on the feet and the nose, the little top here. Now, can you see the bear? If you do that outside, once you see the bear, you will always see the bear. You'll actually see the little white lines connecting it up. Once you see the bear, you will always see the bear. You will never see the Dipper again. You will always see a bear, depending on light pollution, obviously. Now, doing just that simple thing, can actually start to engage you with the sky.